Yesterday, municipal workers from across South Africa took to the streets under the banner of SAMWU's National Day of Action. But this wasn't just another march. The issues raised affect every community that depends on municipalities for electricity, water, sanitation, roads, and other essential services. The question is, are workers exposing the real problem inside local government, or are these concerns being ignored until it is too late? Now, today we unpack the key demands contained in SAMWU's memorandum and examine what they could mean for workers, municipalities, and communities across South Africa. Molini, and welcome to yet another episode of Conversations with Nkosi. Now, this is the news commentary section where we will be offering insightful commentary and exploring various perspectives on the stories that shape our world. Now let us get into the human story behind the march, the Tshwane 43. More than just a labor dispute. One of the issues highlighted during the National Day of Action was the demand for the reinstatement of what has become known as the Tshwane 43 family. These are workers whose dismissal became a major point of contention, and their reinstatement formed part of the memorandum that was submitted during the march. The issue was addressed by the SAMWU regional leadership in Tshwane, who reminded the marchers that behind every labor dispute are real people and real families. What made this particularly powerful was that some of the affected workers were actually present during the march itself, and listening to their stories brought a human dimension to a matter that is, often discussed within, your legal, political, and administrative terms. One worker became overwhelmed, and she just broke down in tears, which was a difficult moment to witness. And according to the accounts shared during the march, some affected families have faced severe financial hardships since losing their income. There were stories of children being affected by financial difficulties at home, families struggling to meet monthly obligations, and households facing the possibility of losing assets because of an inability to keep up with payments. Whether one approaches this issue from a political, legal, or labor perspective, it is difficult to ignore the personal toll that prolonged unemployment can have on workers and their families. This is why the Tshwane 43 have become more than just a labor relations matter. For many people gathered at the march, they represent a broader conversation about fairness, due process, and the dignity of workers. Now, there was a response from the Deputy Executive Mayor of Tshwane. He actually received, the memorandum on behalf of the city, and he publicly expressed support for finding a resolution regarding the 43 dismissed workers. In a statement issued after engaging with workers and labor representatives, the Deputy Executive Mayor stated that efforts would continue towards a just outcome that would allow the affected workers to return to their posts. Workers attending the march were also informed that the 43 employees are expected to resume work on the 1st of August if the process proceeds as indicated. The announcement was welcomed by many of those present, who viewed it as a potentially significant step towards resolving a matter that has remained unresolved for an extended period. As a person who was there, one thing stood out to me above everything else. The story of the Tshwane 43 is often discussed in meetings, courtrooms, and political debates. But yesterday, it was impossible not to see the human impact behind the headlines. When one of the affected workers broke down, like I mentioned earlier, regarding the challenges their family has faced over the past 2 years, the reality of the situation became difficult to ignore. This was not just a labor dispute, guys. These were real people speaking about interrupted lives, financial hardship, and the struggle to maintain dignity in the face of uncertainty. Now, it was a moment that reminded everyone that the true cost of unemployment is measured not only in rands and cents, but in the impact it actually has on families and communities. And then we get into the funding and the governance challenges, starting with the municipal underfunding, right? Another issue that featured prominently in the memorandum was municipal underfunding. The South African Municipal Workers Union argued that municipalities cannot be expected to deliver quality services if they do not have the financial resources required to perform their functions effectively. The union has consistently linked underfunding to, deteriorating infrastructure, service delivery challenges, and growing pressure on municipal workers. The argument from workers is straightforward. How do municipalities maintain roads, repair water infrastructure, keep the lights on, and provide essential services if budgets continue to fall short of what is needed? For many workers at the march, underfunding sits at the center of many of the problems affecting local government today. Then we also have this issue of national treasury interference in municipal governance, which was another demand raised by SAMWU. Right, where the concern being raised is that the decisions affecting municipalities are increasingly influenced by institutions outside of local government structures. Now, those supporting the union's position argue that municipalities need greater autonomy to deal with their own challenges. Others may argue that oversight is necessary in municipalities that have experienced financial and governance difficulties. Whichever side of the debate one falls on, this remains one of the major policy questions facing local government in South Africa. And then the memorandum also raised concerns about the introduction of business units within municipalities, because again, workers fear that such arrangements could eventually lead to greater privatization of municipal functions and weaken, job security. Supporters may view business units as a way of improving efficiency and performance, but critics, however, worry that they can create conditions that move essential public services away from direct public accountability. This remains one of the more contested issues in the local government space. Taken together, these issues raise broader questions about who should have control over municipal decision-making, how municipalities should be funded, and what model of local government best serves communities. Now, before I get into the workers' rights and job security section, I also just wanted to give you an example of how the business unit was introduced in a certain city, and ever since then, waste has literally become waste itself. That department no longer functions like how it used to. Because again, the issue of these business units diverts this notion of a person having to account, and then they hide under this umbrella of the business unit, which is a problem, guys. Now, coming back to workers' rights and job security, one of the most serious concerns raised during the march was the issue of unpaid salaries and third-party deductions. Workers argue that when salaries are delayed, the impact is immediate and devastating. Monthly expenses do not stop because the salary has not been paid. Rent still needs to be paid. Electricity still needs to be purchased. Children still have to go to school. Medical expenses still need attention. And the union argued, that workers should never find themselves uncertain about whether they will receive the salaries they actually worked for. SAMWU also voiced strong opposition to what it calls the tenderization and outsourcing of municipal services. According to the union, municipalities increasingly rely on private companies to perform functions that could be carried out internally. The union argues that municipalities should invest in building internal capacity and creating sustainable jobs instead of depending heavily on external service providers. Supporters of outsourcing may argue that it can improve efficiency and help municipalities access specialized skills. But critics argue that outsourcing can sometimes increase costs while reducing accountability. And it is a debate that continues to divide opinion across local government. Workers at the march also argued that sustainable service delivery begins with stable employment, fair labor practices, and municipalities that invest in their own workforce. Now, guys, regarding accountability and public trust, if there was one issue that drew agreement across many different groups at that march, was the issue of fraud and corruption. Workers argued that resources intended for public services must reach the communities and institutions they were meant to benefit. Corruption does not only affect, balance sheets, but it also affects service delivery. It affects infrastructure development. It affects public confidence in government. And ultimately, it affects the quality of life experienced by ordinary residents. And another issue that appeared in the memorandum was the continued use of consultants. The question raised by workers is simple. If municipalities employ engineers, technicians, planners, and other professionals, why are large amounts of money still being spent on external consultants? The union believes municipalities should strengthen internal skills and capacity rather than becoming overly dependent on outside expertise. At a time when many municipalities face financial constraints, the issue of consultants spending remains a matter of public interest and debate. Now, guys, for many workers, these concerns are linked. They argue that public resources should strengthen municipalities, improve service delivery, and support the people responsible for keeping local government functioning. Now, taken together, the issue raised during, SAMWU's National Day of Action paints a picture of workers who believe local government is at a crossroads. From the fight for the reinstatement of the Tshwane 43 to concerns around municipal underfunding, outsourcing, governance delays, salaries, corruption, and the use of consultants, the message that was delivered yesterday was clear. Workers want municipalities that are financially sustainable, accountable, and capable of delivering quality services while protecting the rights and dignity of those responsible for keeping those services running. But what became increasingly apparent, guys, throughout the march is that many of these concerns extend far beyond labor relations. These are issues that affect communities. When municipalities are underfunded, communities experience deteriorating infrastructure. When corruption takes root, service delivery suffers. When workers are unable to do their jobs effectively, residents feel the consequences. And when families lose their income, entire communities carry the burden. Yesterday's march was therefore about far more than employment disputes or organizational demands. It was about the future of local government. It was about the sustainability of public service. And ultimately, it was about the kind of municipalities South Africans deserve. Now, as someone who attended the march, one thing became clear to me. Behind every demand contained in the memorandum is a human story. The story of the Tshwane 43 is perhaps the best example of that reality. Before yesterday, many people have viewed their case as another labor dispute or political disagreement, but standing there and listening to their stories, guys, made it impossible to ignore the human cost behind the headlines. The reality is that unemployment does not only affect the individual who loses their job. It affects the spouses, it affects children, it affects entire households, and it affects communities, whether one agrees with every demand raised by SAMWU or not. The issues highlighted during the National Day of Action raise important questions that cannot simply be ignored. The memorandum has now been submitted, the commitments have now been made, the promises have now been spoken publicly, but the question now is whether meaningful action will follow. Will the Tshwane 43 finally return to work? Will municipalities receive the support they need? Will accountability become more than just a slogan? And perhaps most importantly, will residents begin to see improvements in the services they depend on every day? Now, those are the questions that remain long after the placards have been lowered and the march has come to an end. That marks the end of today's video. Thank you so much for lending your eyes and ears. I hope that you found today's video informative. Please do not forget to click on that subscription button or light the notification bell so that you do not miss out on any new uploads. Nkosi.